Hey! Hope you had a great Halloween and Thanksgiving because last build episode was actually before both of those holidays. This build period lasted for so long that I was sorting through all the footage and I was like, oh shit, right, that did happen this period, didn't it? But even though you guys may have seen very little of the K100 this last month and a half, trust me with all your heart, I was working hard on this thing in basically all areas possible as my ideas come together in this final stretch. And with gracious new patrons this build period that include Christian Twitty, Megan Stark, and Mike Vincent, I was definitely motivated to have a substantial product to show you guys this episode. So thank you to the patrons, and here's what I'm working with. Yep, that's what we're working with right now. And it looks like an actual motorcycle again. It's pretty much all there to let it roll and bounce like it should, but I'm getting ahead of myself, all right? Let's fall back to October, to literally just before where the last episode ended. Now, if you remember where the last episode ended, I was showing off the beautiful throttle bodies that were rebuilt by Ditstang from Instagram. Well, I had new rubber bushings to install on them fresh out of the plastic, but I was planning to reuse the Oetiker clamps to save some money. In fact, I shot this clip for the last episode, but long story short, the clamps didn't agree with those antics and decided that they would rather warp into an unusable shape when I put elbow grease on them. Figures. So I went ahead and ordered some new clamps and sticker bombed the air plenum in the meantime like I said I would a long time ago. I'll let myself explain. And these little black things on the top, these are the bushings that go between the throttle body assembly and the airbox, which as you can see, I've already sticker bombed. BMW uses what they call an Oetiker clamp, which are these things. Now these are the ones that came with the bike that Ditstang polished up and cleaned up for me. They're better than a worm drive because they're more compact, so that nothing, interrupts all of these complex little bits going on here. So you don't want like a worm gear, stuck right there. So you use these because the clamping mechanism is tiny, right? So thing is, these are one use only. So I mean, some people get away with reusing them. I guess they kind of like stretch them back out a little bit, but I tried and the result is clamps that look like this. Like that's not even round. That's not even round anymore. It looks like an apple. What I did was just decided I'm not going to use this and risk screwing up these things because these rubber, I'm not going to be twisting and turning these things all day. So instead of trying to be cheap, I just ordered some brand new ones. Now these, if you look at the clamp part, you can see that this was obviously clamped closed and this one hasn't been used yet. So these slip on way easier. Now they're two different sizes. I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, you could make out the 50 right there, right in the center. So the top ones are 50 mil and then the bottom ones are 48. I'm gonna go ahead and put these on and then mount up the air plenum and see how everything looks. Now these are preferred when it comes to something that is prone to leaking because you basically don't have to worry about these having uneven pressure, on whatever you're trying to clamp or coming loose or rusting shut or whatever the case may be. But the thing is, they're one use only and you have to have a special tool, which is this. Now, as I mentioned on Instagram for those that follow, I know that the sticker bomb will be a point of debate, but I actually dig it quite a lot. I'm probably a bit biased given my every piece of channel branding, but with that said, it's kind of like a signature, isn't it? The rest of the colors will be conservative, but the plenum will just ooze urban saturation, if that makes sense. In fact, speaking of more conservative colors, I went to pick up the finished wheels only a few days later, and boy was I impressed with the look. See, there's a small flake effect in the gold, and the masking work is just incredible. They even repaired the curb rash that was on the front wheel. I know some of you guys really like the bright 2J yellow wheel, but this wouldn't really work with the blacks, silvers, and golds that are already on the running gear and the front end. With the wheels and rotors ready to go, I can finally finish the front end. And luckily, those tires still look like I never even used them. I got the two wheels. This is the Jigsaw one, that's the BMW one, and I'll get the tire taken off of that. Doing this, because this tire, I'll be surprised if this thing has like 50 miles on it. So what I'm gonna do, even though they have the machine where I think it doesn't even touch the rim, I'm just gonna wrap it with some painter's tape. So I don't know how much this is gonna help around the rim, but whatever. Can't hurt. After an all too familiar trip to the tire shop, it was time to whip out the new Amazon bench grinder that I bought mainly to begin touching up bolts and other knickknacks around the bike. I had never actually used the bench grinder, so it took some fiddling around to get that wire wheel onto it. I opted for a cheap one because I plan to leave this thing outside, but it's pretty stable without being bolted down to a table if you're grinding something light. After the first rotor was installed, I noticed a scratch from the factory on the second rotor straight out of the packaging, which was pretty annoying, but whatever. Rinse and repeat and everything was looking absolutely minty. At that point, the only thing left to do was to install a wheel assembly onto the forks. So I got the axle in the front wheel, but I'm gonna go ahead and touch up these caliper bolts and the pinch bolts for the forks. And running this 310 rotor, I actually have to take the calipers off to safely get the wheel on. Also, the frame is a long story, but it'll be explained. That's not the final color of it, but like I said, it'll be explained. That's a story for a different time. You know, after finishing the throttle body assembly, finishing the front end was a second hype moment of the build because as I looked at the front end sitting on that table, it became clear that all the picking and fiddling around with a bunch of parts from every which way had managed to coalesce into something uniform. Everything that I pictured in my head worked in practice, and you know, that's a great feeling. It's also helpful because it helps guide the color for the rest of the bike, so this was a big win. Moving from the front of the bike to the back of the bike, I gave some attention to the final drive, differential, axle, whatever you want to call it. Now, if you remember, I screwed up the bolts for the rear rotor and ended up drilling one out. And honestly, I wish I hadn't because I just wrecked the threads on one and later on successfully used a bolt extractor kit for the other one. And I wish I just waited, but it's fine because all these bolts really do is hold the rotor up and keep the holes aligned for the rear wheel installation. See, the issue is that these bolts are too shallow for the amount of Loctite used on them from BMW, so the heads commonly strip out. You know, if you're working on a K-bike, I would highly advise you that you use freeze spray and heat so you could get these things out in one piece. I mean, honestly, they're a real pain in the ass. I replaced one bolt with a countersunk bolt of the same size, and I used the stub of the other one to align the rotor. It's a small victory, but a highly appreciated one because it's real easy to strip your wheel lugs when the rotor is flopping around during installs. But not everything was sweet. Let me tell you of a bit of trouble that I had regarding the frame. So, I'd given Arcane Moto the frame to be powder coated, but upon chemically stripping and blasting the frame, they advised that I let their welding contact touch up the welds as best he can for not only more strength, but also better appearance. Even going so far as to add a gusset to the left side of the rear of the frame. The problem is that with all the heat from the TIG welding, it got in like a smidge out of alignment with the rear mounts. See, when you heat up metal and nothing is holding it to a specific shape, it'll actually twist and start doing some weird shit. Now, I don't have an oxy torch at home, so I figured that might be the level of heat necessary to tweak the frame back to a point where the rear holes mount up. But the problem with that is that I was gonna have to move the whole engine and transmission combo out of the backyard to, as a rig, so we could line up everything. And I'll have to get into a van once again, which is an absolute pain in the ass because you guys know I have to take it through my entire house. And honestly, at this point, I was just hoping that there would be one last time where I'd have to do that, and that's when the bike is absolutely done. So I wasn't really looking forward to that, but I was gonna have to do it. So even though I had an appointment to get help with fixing the frame using an oxy torch, I thought, what's the harm in trying myself with a simple MAP gas torch? Now, to install a frame, you have to press in these little rubber engine mounts that are there to help with vibration. If your bike has the original ones from when it left Germany, then odds are they'll be destroyed upon removal. So if you plan to get your frame powder coated for your K-bike, understand that if you're gonna have to buy these little shits. And that would be okay, but the problem is they're $75 a piece for a stupid little bushing, which is nuts to me. And to add insult to injury, they typically don't stock these in the United States, so you have to wait a whole lot of time for these things because they have to ship them from Germany. But anyway, I'll get into more detail about those things, how to install them, because obviously I'm gonna have to do them again for a second time, so no sense in explaining right now. So what I did was I took a MAP gas torch to the rear of the frame, the down tubes, until they got glowing red hot. They call that cherry red. Then I just slapped each side with a rubber mallet until everything lined up. Dude, I need you to understand just how much time and effort was saved just by trying off of a whim to do it myself, because the MAP gas torch actually did the trick, and here's the proof. I also took a chance to mock up the old seat for my own eye, and the shape was much better than that giant square of old. In fact, this mock-up seat is actually made with the old one. It's just been on a diet. Now, after all this, it was finally time to return the frame back to Arcane Moto and let them do their thing. The whole time I was hoping that they could safely extract those little bushings, because then I wouldn't have to spend another $150 on another set. Here's hoping, right? But while they did their thing, there was still plenty more for me to do in the absence of the frame. I felt that it made the most sense to finally tackle the oil pan because I could still flip the engine since it would be alone for a few weeks. See, the inside of the oil pan was actually very clean. The black color is some kind of coating on the inside. It's not sludge or anything like that. The pickup screen itself was actually pretty good, minus some silicone stringers from, whatever gasket somebody made previously. And the filter was pretty nice looking. It was like an AC Delco unit, but it had no documentation, so I'm not too sure when it was installed.
Yo, this thing looks way better than I thought it would look. I don't really know what this is though. It might be like silicone or something. Yeah, I have no idea. I know this is like silicone or like a gasket for something. Probably what went around the oil pan, got caught up in there. So I'm gonna wash this out. This oil filter looks pretty new, but I have one, so I'll just switch it out anyway.
So this is the oil change kit that I bought. It comes with a new filter, a filter wrench, a new gasket, and a crush washer. The thing is, the wrench was too big for the Delco filter. But luckily the filter was only like, just over finger tight, as it really should be. You never really need to torque these down too much. So I cleaned off the gasket surface, installed the new filter, used gasket maker on the oil pan cover, and I just reinstalled everything the same way. This was a pretty quick job, so I went ahead and just checked the oil pump housing to see if there was any dirt behind it. And of course, after dealing with 2 stripped out bolts with varying levels of success, of course I realized that there was all the dirt in the world behind that front cover. Now this upper part is open to the world by these small little holes around it. It's not internal to the engine, but this pump definitely would have to come out in order to clean that up. Now whether or not it would need to be rebuilt had remained to be seen at that point, but it sure as hell needed a bath. Now with that said, I packed it up and saved it for another day because it was like 20 something degrees that day and I was beginning to feel nauseous from the cold. After all, man, it was tea time, so I packed it all up and went inside.
Mail time.
The mail's here. Come on. Bye, guys.
Yeah, a big parts haul basically got thrown at my head all at once during this annoyingly rainy day, which made it a little bit better. So here's what I got. I got a Caliper Rebuild Kit for that rear caliper, the original one to the K100, not the new ones. But this kit works for the original front calipers as well. They're basically the same caliper, just with different mounts, so it's interchangeable. I got this swing-on boot because mine was actually ripped and the ring was broken. And I went peak hipster and bought this Ohio country radio station sticker from 1998. Because you all know how big of a country music fan I am. But also, besides that, the radio station is called K100. And I could flip this 98 upside down to make it say 1986 if I cut out the K100 and the year. yeah, kind of cheeseball, but it's kind of vintage and yeah, whatever. Anyway. Oh, and I also bought an engine bolt kit for a KLR 650? Yeah, no, that's not what I bought, but that's what I got. I actually ordered a kit for a 1986 K100 because that's what I own. But the universe had other ideas. But for a second, I thought, well, maybe it's the same kit for both bikes. Like maybe they use the same bolts, so they kind of, I don't know, they're interchangeable. So I went out into the rain and, well, hey, at least some of the bolts fit for the oil pump. So maybe I'll just keep these and move on with my... No, stop being lazy. Contact the seller. So I go and contact the seller, and they immediately got back to me, owning up to the mistake, and they also immediately sent out the right kit. And the cherry on top is that they let me keep the KLR bolts. You know, I've dealt with sellers in the past who will make you send back the incorrect item that they sent you before they will send the correct item, which is fine, but at least send it at the same time that I send the wrong item back, so I'm not wasting triple shipping time for my item that I didn't get in the first place. Anyway, yeah, Desmo Bolt kits, totally recommend them. Real stand-up guys over there. I left them positive feedback, despite the hiccup. It doesn't matter. They made the situation right. But in the meantime, I could still rebuild that caliper, so here's what that kit comes with. Instructions, lubricant, 2 O-rings, 2 outer seals, 2 bolts, and 2 inner seals. I don't know the technical name for those things. Now, the first step was to get the piston out on one side, which was quite eventful and perhaps even dangerous. So using this contraption, I was able to pop this piston out, and it shot into the roof. It shot into the ceiling and bounced off and landed over there. So I'm gonna be putting on some eye protection for the next one. But what I did was I took a bottle of compressed air for like electronics, put it on this end, taped it closed so the pressure doesn't escape too quickly. And then I used a piece of dried gasket maker. I held this side down and then use my finger to press this, and it just comes out. And you can see all the crap that's behind there. This is the anatomy of the caliper, right? So you got one of the halves. You have these 2 seals, this small one, and this small one. But they go up here. That's where the passageway for the brake fluid gets to the other side between the calipers. This is the piston. This goes immediately around the piston. That goes on the outside. They also give you these 2 bolts, which is great because mine look awful. But before installing the new seals, I had to clean and paint the caliper halves, as well as the hardware that goes along with them. Of course, brake cleaner and a bench grinder and engine enamel was the obvious choice here. I put the rest of the caliper back together and mounted it to the final drive, but it was only until the pads arrived that I could finish the job. The correct engine bolt kit also came at the same time, which would be the next project. I'm actually a big fan of this kit because they actually provide you instructions. I mean, torque values would have been nice, but since I have a shop manual, I could simply look those up anyway. If I remember correctly, all the oil pan bolts are 7 Newton meters, so not too much torque at all. If you've never used a torque wrench before, you simply just select the torque limit that you want and you just turn on the bolt until the wrench clicks. By doing these bolts one by one, I was actually able to keep the gasket that I made from before. Now, unfortunately, even though I gave the pan a coat of paint, the fact that the engine sits on a table, it just scratches it all up again. So, you know, what you're gonna do? It's the underside, so who really cares anyway? Not only did I still have the new gasket for the oil filter cover, but the kit also came with 3 stainless steel bolts for it, so I might as well change everything out then, including the upper pan bolts. When you get them all in, you realize that these bolts are actually a very nice touch, you know? I was looking forward to replacing the bolts on the water and the oil pump, but first I had to clean it and check the internals, you know, in case it needed a rebuild. The problem with the K-bike oil pumps, especially the early ones, is that they are very much poorly designed, and they're prone to wear and failure, basically. Now, I've already done 2 oil and coolant drains on this bike, but both times I never noticed the mixing of coolant and oil, which is often characteristic of destroyed pump seals, since 2 sides of the same pump handle oil and coolant. Now, because of that, I was pretty optimistic that this one has been serviced recently, and that I'd be able to slap it right back onto the engine after drilling out yet another strip bolt and cleaning up the oil pump. Yeah, but no, not how that went. First off, the pump was even filthier than I thought. And second, I noticed that everything about this thing was old. I mean, the shaft immediately snapped because the lock nut was seized onto the threads after 30-something years. That immediately ruined the shaft. But still, it was time to drive the shaft out to remove the impeller. Now, this is the old style, the obsolete style impeller. This one is made of cast iron, but it was replaced with a nicer steel one. Once it all came apart, you can see clear as day the shape that the seals were in. I mean, this shit looked absolutely gross. Not good. The pump job is getting more and more expensive the deeper I go, but then I got a good look at the shaft itself. Dunzo. Scored and burnt all to hell. Gotta replace that too. And the thing about it, it's a $221 part. I mean, the seals were so disintegrated that they just kept crumbling as I tried to press them out with the flathead. I got most of the seal material out, but it was pretty clear that I was gonna have to order a whole lot of shit to fix this. $340 worth of shit, in fact. But that's not where the difficulties ended with the pump. I'll get back to that later though. I want to get on to the good stuff, the frame. Once again, I had taken a very familiar trip down to Arcane Moto on one cold ass night, and I left with my custom frame. I plopped it down onto one of Ginger's bed mats, but she won't mind if you don't tell her. And as much as I want to rip this thing out of the plastic and just stare at it, I still had 3 bushings to install on the frame before I could even do anything with it. Now, first up was the brass bushing that goes onto the suspension pivot point. The plastic will help protect it as I flip the frame around over and over and put a ton of grease on everything. I was actually proactive about this one, and I threw both halves of it into the freezer, which will cause them to shrink ever so slightly, and also combined with the copious amounts of grease, it should make this thing go in a lot easier. So I got disturbingly familiar with the back end of this frame, and I installed each side one by one. Remember those little $74 bushings? Well, luckily they were able to be saved, probably because they weren't exposed to 30-something years of hell, so they actually popped back out in reasonable shape. That's awesome, honestly, because I was afraid I was gonna have to spend more money on the same shit. Now, I didn't freeze these because you want them to be flexible enough to squeeze, but as always, a ton of grease helps. You have to note though, these have a very specific direction that they have to go in. If you put them in backwards, you won't be able to bolt up your frame. See, one side is mostly metal, and the other side is mostly rubber. So obviously you want to press them in on the rubber side first because that's the side capable of squeezing. If the frame is upside down in front of you, how can I put this? If it's upside down in front of you, in the same fashion that I'm doing it, where the rear of the frame is to your right, then this is where the mostly rubber side should face. After everything is greased up, you just take a 3-inch or more C-clamp to it and use something soft on the other side to protect the powder coat at the front. Now, don't rush it. If it comes out of alignment, just start over. Because if you tear these little shits, you're gonna be upset. Turn the crank in and out and use your hand to keep it aligned. And now once you get it about halfway in, you can keep cranking on it until you feel it stop, or you could just stop prematurely. But at some point, you're gonna have to grab a socket. Now I use a 22 mil. If you put it on the outer end, it will act as a bucket for the bushing to push into behind the cloth. Once again, just take your time and keep correcting it until the lip pops out on the other side. So there it is, installed with no damage to the powder coat. Now, the other side is the same story, but yo, this is the direction that they should both face, because remember, the engine mounts actually offset on the K-bikes. So you want the flat metal side of the bushings to make contact with the mounts on the motor. Don't forget that. So it was at this point that the frame could finally leave its plastic prison. And boy, did it look great in that Evo gray color. See, I went with this color because I felt that black would be just too much like everyone else, you know? But at the same time, some crazy color would draw too much attention to what is admittedly a not really attractive frame, let's just say that. You know, not nothing like a Ducati trellis frame, anything like that, nothing artsy. So a matte gray would kind of look muscular, but still understated like black would. As you saw, it was way too dark outside to install this, so I just waited until the next morning, where the first step was to put on that replacement VIN tag since the powder coat process blew the old shitty BMW sticker that they were using at the time off. I used zip ties to stick it as best as I could, but I'll probably end up either siliconing the edges or just riveting it all together. I don't really know yet. Oh, also, I ordered some silicone hoses, but unfortunately I can't really install them until the oil pump is finished because one goes straight to the oil pump, you know? At that point, I gave the frame one last look over in the sunlight before I got to assembling. Now, this is the stuff you've all seen a million times, so I just shot some video at each step, you know, before the bike was assembled. Also, I had to go to work in a few hours, so I couldn't really futz around with the camera too much. And like I said, you guys seen me assemble this bike and disassemble it a million times, so what's the point? So what do you think? I really like what I'm looking at. Like, even as I watch the footage to write this, I'm smirking up a storm. Now, I will say that it'll look even better with a radiator, fender, exhaust, pod filter, etc., because those things will fill out some hollow spaces, you know, especially under the tank and over the engine, because it's kind of empty. But it's great because I know that those spaces will be filled and it's going to look even better than it does now. Also, the thickness of the seat needs to be a little bit higher, maybe triple the thickness. But, I mean, this is cardboard, so what do you expect? I'm also waiting on the black engine covers with the brushed fins to replace these old alley-colored ones. Now, what I really like is that pitched forward, looks fast while standing still look this thing has going on. It's like part cafe, but also part Street Fighter. I love looking at this thing right now because finally I can see where all the goddamn money went. But please, tell me what you think in the comments, you know, for better or worse. I already have an exhaust on the way and it's pretty damn dope, so I can't wait to see how that looks bolted up. Oh, by the way, the oil pump parts actually arrived while I was wrenching here, but unfortunately, as I was putting it back together, I had realized that for some reason, one of the seals were too small. And that was like step one. So like I sat down, laid everything out, went to install the seal, and I just like, can't do anything now. I was more annoyed, but since I've ordered another seal and I believe it's the right one, I just have my fingers crossed. But I'll show you what $340 in BMW parts look like, minus the pump body. Yeah, expensive, but I can't wait to get this thing back together. So, we'll finish up the pump next episode as well as start the wiring for the bike. See, I've bought so many things that I haven't even showed you this episode because I never got a chance to use them. They're not relevant right now. But next episode, you'll see all of the things that I bought. As I said, I have a full exhaust on the way, but my next step will be to just start seeing where I'll situate everything on the bike, including wires and injection or ignition components. There's no reason why that episode can't drop very soon after this one. So I'll be keen to get stuff out with frequency. Now, as for the bike, I basically shrink wrapped the whole thing underneath the cover. Yeah, it's kind of goofy, I know, but no need to let the weather ruin this progress. You know, with this weather, we're in crunch time. You know, we gotta get this thing done before a major snowfall. So let's just finish this goddamn bike already. I'll see y'all in the next episode. Thank you for watching, and if I don't update you before the 25th, then enjoy your Christmas as well. See ya.